We're looking here at the long run equilibrium position in oligopoly. Production takes place in the normal way where MC cuts MR, and here the result of that is an equilibrium price quantity combination of P1, Q1. So that's the same for all firms. Everyone should produce at the profit maximizing position. The differences here are, first of all, that the firm faces what we call a kinked demand curve. In other words, a very elastic demand curve for part of it and then a less elastic demand curve for another part of it. And the question is then, why does it face these two demand curves? Of course, the fact that it faces two demand curves means that there must also be two marginal revenue curves. So this is the more elastic marginal revenue curve and this is the less elastic one. And that's why we get that sort of kinked demand curve and then the unusually shaped marginal revenue curve as well. So the reason for the kinked demand curve is that in oligopoly, even though it's not supposed to happen, collusion and agreement on price generally tends to happen. So if you think of any oligopolistic firm producing, let's say, cars, there are only so many cars. There are only so many different models within each mark of car. And everybody sort of agrees that the small family car is roughly around 20,000. The larger one is 27 or 8, and then the luxury one is, let's say, 35 or 6. So if any one firm were to stray above that market equilibrium price and just get greedy and decide that they want more, the other competitors will allow them to do that. They will simply allow them to put their price up because they know that if they put their price up, they face this very elastic demand curve. And you can see here at this new quantity 2, they lose a huge amount of sales. Had they remained at P1, their share of the market would have been much greater. Now, the opposite to that, if they decided to reduce their price to P2, okay, they now face a very inelastic demand curve. So in other words, they reduce their price by a lot, as we can see here, but they only increase their quantity demanded by relatively little. So the question is then, why is it that if they increase their price, they lose a lot of business, but if they reduce their price, they only gain a certain amount of business? And the answer is because, again, there is collusion or there's general agreement on prices, so that if this firm reduces its price, the other firms will follow it down. So if the firm selling the small family car for 20,000 decides to drop it to 17,000, the other competitors will realise they are going to lose business, so they will then follow that price reduction down. And all that happens then, in theory, is that everyone ends up ultimately with the same amount of customers that they had previously, except they're now getting 17,000 euros a car instead of 20,000 euros a car. So the logic there is then stick to the original price, stick to the price that we all tacitly agreed with and agreed to, even if we didn't do that formally. So the second aspect of oligopoly is this concept of sticky prices. Okay, we'll come across that a lot. So just to go back to basics, production takes place where MC cuts MR. Okay, but if costs were to increase, okay, the firm will still continue to produce where MC cuts MR, but that will result in no increase in price. Okay, so in other words, there's a certain range here, whereby the firm operating in oligopoly will absorb the price increase themselves. Take, for example, again, the manufacture of cars. If steel became more expensive to a certain extent, the firms manufacturing cars will absorb that cost themselves. They won't pass that on to the consumer because of the kinked demand curve. They know that if they do pass it on, they're liable to lose a lot of business. Now, of course, this doesn't follow no matter what the increase is. It just means that within a certain range, the firm between D and E there, within a certain range, even if marginal cost increases, okay, they will absorb that cost so that marginal cost will equal marginal revenue at the same price quantity output. Beyond that, then they would have to pass it on. But then again, collusion kicks in, so they would all pass it on. So again, the two main concepts are the one I've just outlined of sticky prices and then the kinked demand curve. So any further questions then, bring them up in class.